All right. Hey, good evening, folks. Once again, we are back taking a look at the tropics. Tonight is Tuesday, September 3rd, 2024. We're looking at the tropics this evening and looking at the hurricane season as a whole so far. We've been a while since we talked. My last video was July 31st when Ernesto was beginning to start to take shape. And we've not talked since then because, quite frankly, besides Ernesto, there has been nothing going on in the Atlantic Basin, and we are amid a unbelievably quiet stretch of the hurricane season, in a season that was forecast to be hyperactive by everybody from the most esteemed experts to the most basement dwelling hype man extreme weather people, all uniformly, myself included, expected a very active hurricane season. And besides that roaring start with Hurricane Beryl and Debbie, we haven't had that kind of activity. And it's been very perplexing. It very much has shown the science that we are nowhere near there yet. And we're going to talk about a few causes, potential issues. I definitely can't give you all the causes. I'm not an expert in climatology. I'm not somebody who can really talk about this to any significantly intelligent level, but I can definitely wade through at least waist deep and bring you a few points that we've been considering so far. But we're going to talk about that, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what's currently going on in the tropics and what we might have over the next couple of weeks. We'll start with the Colorado State hurricane season forecast way back up here. This is over on KBTX in Bryant, Texas. Philip Klotzbach is a hurricane researcher at Colorado State University. He learned from Dr. Bill Gray, one of the pioneers of subseasonal hurricane forecasting in the 1980s, and Dr. Gray's work is still widely considered some of the best in the industry. And, he had this tweet the other day that really kind of put the icing on the cake. The Atlantic has had no named storm formation since Ernesto on August 12th. The last time that happened was in 1968. Remarkably quiet period for the Atlantic hurricane season. And there's a couple different causes. So we're going to kind of just run through these. I'm not going to get into great detail, but we can kind of look at some different things. The first thing we look at is we've kind of had an Atlantic Nina developing. So we talk about El Nino and La Nina a lot. You hear us say these terms, and we're talking about the Pacific side. That is when the equatorial central Pacific Ocean cools or warms, warming being El Nino, cooling being Nina, and that can affect the global wind patterns. So when we have an El Nino in the Pacific, we have more wind shear and we have less hurricanes. When we have La Nina in the Pacific, which is what we've trended towards lately, we have typically less wind shear and more hurricanes in the Atlantic because the Pacific Ocean is so big, it disrupts the entire global weather pattern. Now, Ninas in the Atlantic are much more common, but you can see here from this NOAA article that we have had a Nina developing kind of south of the coast of Africa, right along the equatorial Atlantic Ocean. And this has caused some significantly cooler waters, and this has disrupted wind patterns and everything else. And when we talk about all this stuff, we have to remember that the climate is this big series of gears. It's all winds at different levels. Everything you see here is represented in 2 dimensions, but it's in 3 dimensions. It's moving every which way. It's moving up, it's moving down, it's moving north, it's moving south, it's moving tangentially, horizontally. It's moving in every which direction, and there's a whole bunch of gears all trying to turn together. And when you start messing with certain gears, it messes up every other gear. So when we talk about this stuff and you go, okay, well, the water's a few degrees cooler at the equator where you've told me hurricanes don't even go anyway. How could that even happen? It's because it starts having a chain reaction or like a butterfly effect of all the other systems at play. This Nina was not expected very well, although we did see signs going into the early summer this was happening. And you can see here by May on this little graph over here on the right side that we were trending down, and then we hit a rapid cooling into the months of June and July. So overall, our sea surface temperatures are still very warm. They are still near record warm in some cases, but we've noticed some subtle changes. You can see the blues down here in the equatorial Atlantic showing cooling, and we also have very warm temperatures up in the northern Atlantic. This is what we call a NAO plus, a North Atlantic oscillation, being in a positive setting, especially in the month of August. It was in a near record high setting, and this pattern can disrupt global weather patterns. This can move your jet stream to further north. It can cause shifts in the Bermuda Azores high. high, which can cause shifts in wind shear and wind patterns. And it can have a chain reaction that can once again halt or definitely slow down activity in the tropics, these hurricanes that come off of Africa. Another thing we see is when those wind patterns get disrupted, look what happens. The seas do cool. So some people often think, and this is a very valid thing, when they think, okay, Cody, well, we've had almost no hurricane activity all year, and that water is just sitting there boiling and baking and baking and boiling, and it's going to be 100 degrees by the end of September, and we're going to have a mega cane that's going to show up. And I get what you're saying, and it's a very valid concern. And is that to some degree happening? In some ways, it's very possible. But I want you to look at the last 7 days of the sea surface temperature changes. We've had reductions almost across the entire tropical Atlantic, from the Gulf of Mexico to the coast of Africa, because the wind patterns have shifted, and because the winds have been so unfavorable. Stronger, faster winds in the Atlantic, not related to hurricanes, will pull warm water away and force cold water to come up from the surface. So if this is your water surface, fast winds come across, they pull the heat away, and then cold water rises up to take its place. It's called upwelling. So we've seen that going on in the Gulf of Mexico. That's more been due to heavy rainfall and persistent kind of frontal boundaries in the area and whatnot. So we've had that going on. We've had disruption of the pattern over Africa, where we get our waves coming off of Africa. We have seen significant, staggering disruptions to the wind and weather patterns across northern Africa. This is a map showing you that the total precipitable water across northern Africa, where I'm circling, is the Sahara Desert. This is northern Africa. The Mediterranean Sea is north of this line. Europe is right here. So this is northern Africa. This is, countries like Libya and Egypt and Morocco. I mean, this is the northern part of Africa, and we are talking about deviations 4 or 5 times what they're supposed to have. They have had an unbelievably wet season, and this has wreaked havoc on the African waves. These old tropical waves that are supposed to be moving off to the west and coming off of Africa have been heavily disrupted, and in some cases just not coming off very well at all. So you've got that going on. So you have bad waves. Then you have the combination of the cooling temperatures and the cooler temperatures across the eastern Atlantic adding up for less waves coming off, worse waves coming off, hitting colder water, hitting more wind shear, and then being forced along way too fast by westerly, easterly trade winds that are too strong. So all that adds up to be like, oh, wow, well, that kind of makes sense. You have all these other issues. And then there's other ones we haven't even talked about. We had a record high tornado season, and a lot of veteran, longtime storm chasers will tell you, if we have a busy, busy tornado season, we very rarely have a very busy hurricane season. And it's kind of like one of those things that science hasn't really fully proven yet. But like that guy at the gym gives you some tips, and he doesn't have research in front of him, but he's jacked, and you're kind of like, yeah, that makes sense. I might just do what this guy says. It's kind of one of those things, So all that to be said, that we have definitely had some issues. And if we look at the current sea surface temperature analysis over on Tropical Tidbits, some of these years, 2013 was supposed to be hyperactive, was a dud. 1967 was a year that had basically no storms form between June and August, and the ones that formed in June were like depressions. The first named storm wasn't until the beginning of September. Now that season wound up being active. 1970 was a pretty quiet season. 1988 was a pretty quiet season for the most part. You have these seasons that have maybe 1 or 2 highlights, but then in overall activity, they're pretty quiet. Now, 2017 makes this list, and that's interesting. But, 4 of these 5 right here are all less active seasons. So definitely a lot of stuff to consider. There's also upper tropospheric warming, which we won't even get into. But bottom line is just this. There's a lot that goes into hurricane season forecasting. And just because the climate is slowly warming, and yes, it is, but I'm not one of those people that are climate alarmists where I'm running and jumping off cliffs and trying to steal everybody's money to give it to someone to fix it. I am simply someone who thinks, yeah, it's probably happening, and we need to be researching how this affects our global weather patterns. And, there's some evidence to say that a warmer climate may actually produce less hurricanes because the upper levels are warmer too. But I don't want to wade too much more into that, but that's just yet another thing that we're looking at. So I just gave you like 6 or 7 different causes for the potential lack of tropical activity this year. So the question is now, is this going to change? Well, looking at what we have tonight, we have 3 areas of interest in the Atlantic, all with a yellow, so 30% or less development chance in the National Hurricane Center. The X right here in the Central Caribbean was the wave that all the models lit up on to the east of the Antilles, and then it never formed. And now it looks like its best shot is to form somewhere around the Yucatan Peninsula, but it does appear that as this wave moves off to the west, we're going to have a fairly strong cold front coming in next week, or this weekend rather. So we can see here on Wednesday on the GFS 700 to 300 millibar on tropical tidbits. As we go into Thursday, Friday timeframe and into the weekend, we have this strong cold front pushing into Florida and the Gulf Coast. And whatever's left of this system should likely be shunted and stay down in the Atlantic or in the Gulf. Some energy will likely move into the Pacific. I could see something festering or lingering in this area. Sometimes we'll have another low develop and kind of ride up the front sometimes. So wouldn't be completely shocked if we see something else. Some of these models are kind of indicating that. GFS especially was showing some tropical, something going on here, but it would likely be weak and very fast moving. Probably not going to be all that big of a deal. And these other 2 waves out there, they're just kind of like, some weak convection. They're kind of doing some stuff. That one out by Africa, highly likely to just recurve. And this one here, just a 10% to develop. And then it looks like wind shear will become unfavorable by the end of the week and into the weekend. So, we have a few candidates, and in a lot of other seasons, these things would be blowing up, but they're just not. I mean, if we look at this system down south of Hispaniola, the background trade winds across the Caribbean are screaming at like 30 knots. There's no way this can develop right here. I mean, it's just, you look at it and you go, no, that's just not going to happen, So, definitely been very interesting in the Atlantic Basin. And I don't want to say that hurricane season is over, because it's not. I think that October could be particularly backloaded if some of these other analogs are, we repeat that kind of historical pattern. I think that, as the upper air begins to cool, we start to change seasons. That could help give these storms some more oomph to get going. We could have a reversal of the Atlantic pattern where we have less, wind shear and everything kind of kicks back around, and we can still use that warm water. I still think the pot lid could come off at some point, but something is clearly wrong right now, and we're not 100% sure when that's going to change. So I don't want to just keep saying, oh guys, give it another week and we'll have hurricanes everywhere, because obviously that's not the case. So we're just going to track it, take it as it comes. You should still be prepared and be ready. It's just the way things are. But we'll have more on that. And then finally tonight, rest of the world is fairly quiet. Eastern Pacific, not a lot going on. No storms in the Central Pacific. We do have a typhoon, or tropical storm, Yagi, which is to the northwest rather of the Philippines, quickly organizing. This system is looking pretty good, and got that shrimp look. This is likely rapidly intensifying and is forecast to become a significant typhoon south of Hong Kong, and then make landfall in parts of China, and looks like eventually Vietnam over the next couple of days. So that'll be something we're watching. And we've had a lot of activity in the Western Pacific, which again signals that the Atlantic may not be as open for business. So that's what I got for you guys tonight. I know the video was a little long, but that was what we had to get to. And hopefully that helps to explain some of the things. Again, I kind of went wave tops on most of that stuff. There's a lot more scientific stuff to get into, but for the sake and purpose of the video and just kind of understanding it as a person who just is curious about what's going on, that should give you a general idea of what has been going wrong in this hurricane season. But obviously the research and the full analysis and the autopsy on what has or may not happen in the future of this season will definitely need to be studied for years to come after this. So again, guys, stay vigilant. We it only takes one to be bad, and I still think with these sea surface temperatures, something's going to kick off eventually. It's just this pattern has got to look different before that happens. So that's what I got for you guys tonight. As always, thanks for watching. We will have more videos just as they need to come out. But until then, just enjoy the quiet, and maybe we'll sneak through this season unscathed. We'll see. That's all I got for you guys. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.